Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of the show. Today, we got a kind of special one for you here today. This is an idea I've been looking to do for a little while about this whole idea of is U.S. prog legit or not? We're going to make the case that it is, and I brought two guys that are going to help me through this conversation. We've got all the way over from the Prog Corner, Mr. Scot Lade, and for
Hey,
Tim's Vinyl Confessions, Mr. Tim Durling. What's going on, guys?
good to be back, Pete. An honor. This is going to be a good episode.
This is going to be a good one. So yeah, this is
great to be on. I'm really happy to finally be on the show. I've watched plenty, so
awesome. Well, it's great to have you for the first time, Tim and Scott. This is your sophomore appearance.
There you go. There you go. No sophomore slump going to happen today, Pete.
No, I don't think so. So let me give a little bit of background on why we're doing this particular show. So as everybody knows who's watching today, we have this Tuesday night show called In the Prog Seat. It's been on the air for quite a while now. And in recent months, I have noticed we have a lot of folks from the UK who watch the channel. That's cool, right? UK and North America, that's our biggest market for SOT. But it seems like every time that we've brought up like an American band like Kansas or Starcastle or Happy the Man, I see lots of comments from people from the UK who are like, that's not really prog. The real progressive rock started with and came from the UK bands. And while I would say that the most notable ones certainly came from the UK, I mean, who can argue Yes and Genesis and King Crimson, ELP and Gentle Giant, and all those bands? I love them. They're arguably the greatest. But were they the only ones? And can we really say that some of the US bands that followed, and maybe even that came before, aren't progressive rock either, right? I think they are, and that's the argument we're going to make here today. We're going to, Scott's already shaking his head.
Chomping at the bit, Pete. I get similar comments on my channel. I do get a lot of UK viewers, and the idea that Kansas is prog or Styx is prog just is anathema to them. And I get it. Some of these bands did come out later, but the origin of prog didn't start within the court of the Crimson King. If you look at the artists and the bands that really were influential in the formation of prog, people bring up Miles Davis and Dave Brubeck. People bring up the Beach Boys. You've got Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention in that mix, and Captain Beefheart. I'm hearing a whole lot of Americanism going on here. So
right, and that's before 1969, which was in the court of the Crimson King, right? And some people may say, well, the Moody Blues were using Mellotron and doing some orchestral stuff a couple years before King Crimson. Yeah, but a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, we're going back.
Yeah, and you can talk about some of the psychedelic stuff, the Doors and the Jefferson Airplanes of the world, also very influential in creating prog. So the Americans had a lot to do and a lot to say about prog. But, honestly, to me, if you talk about the history of prog, you got to look at Frank Zappa as being one of the seminal minds to create a progressive attitude and atmosphere for prog to flourish around the world. So, yeah, that would be my first example that you can't take American prog for granted in any way, shape, or form. The Mothers of Invention, Frank Zappa, absolutely. And Hot Rats is my first example A for the kiddies at home. If you want to diss Americans as having nothing to do with prog, this came out in 1969. Yeah. I'd have to check my dates, but I think it was a couple weeks after In the Court of the Crimson King came out. I'm not sure. But it doesn't get a whole lot more progressive than this thing right here. And you could cite a dozen different Zappa albums, early Zappa albums, as examples of what was going on very, very early on.
Yeah, to your point, that wasn't the first Zappa album, right? I mean, he's got a whole bunch that came out before that, and maybe the reason why a lot of people don't point to Zappa as American prog is because there's so many different styles and things going on all those Zappa albums. It's almost like you can't say it's just prog, because there's pop on there, there's psychedelic music on there, there's acid rock on there, there's jazz on there. It's like this weird combination of all sorts of things.
Oh yeah.
But is it progressive?
And right from the get-go, I mean, Freak Out, Absolutely Free.
For the money.
We're only in it for the money. You can't pin that thing down stylistically. It's not a capital P prog album, any of those. But, you know, you look at Jazz Fusion as an offshoot of prog. That's a whole other thing we could talk about. That began very late in the 60s in the US, you could argue. So, you know, there's example A of the early prog being very indebted to American music. Frank Zappa for sure.
So what do we do with these?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you and I have already talked before about
yeah.
Chicago's merits as a prog band.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, was anybody doing anything like this in 1969, 1970?
Yeah.
Where you're incorporating horns and long suites and, you know, mixing blues and jazz and pop and rock all in kind of one sound. I mean, there was nothing like this at the time.
It was just amazing. And, you know, you say there's nothing like it, but maybe a little bit.
Maybe with the Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Yep, exactly.
Maybe a little bit with you know, this Mach 2 of Blood, Sweat, and Tears after Al Cooper left. They sounded a whole lot, that horn sound, that jazz rock sound. I thought it was going to take over the world in 69, 1970. I'm a little kid. I thought I'd heard the sound of the future. Is it prog, capital P prog? None of it really is, but it's super progressive.
Yeah. Yeah,
so, I mean, Chicago definitely, that whole thing going on at that turn of the decade, very cool. And then we had you know, a few other bands, like you had this thing here, band from Minneapolis. This band moved to LA and they got sniffed out. I'm at Ert again. Apparently, we fell in love with them. Went out to see them a bunch of times, and they opted not to sign with Atlantic. They signed with some startup named Metro Media that didn't do anything for them. This is a prog album. Yeah, it's got Crosby, Stills, and Nash kind of vocals, but this thing came out in 1970. So there was still some like early proto prog stewing in the mix in 1970 in the US. You know, part of the problem, I think, Pete, is that America is a really, really big country. And in the UK, you can play London, Birmingham, Liverpool, Leeds, you know, got
it all covered.
And you're hitting a whole bunch of media markets too, where you got all this music media behind a band that can do that in a couple weekends. To crack the American market was going to take a whole lot more. So little regional bands started popping up. You got to remember, this is pre-deregulation times, the early 70s radio. So you were getting all these like regional hits happening. Styx wrote Lady in 1973, but it didn't really break for them for a couple of years because it was just a hit on WLS in Chicago, and it took a long, long time.
Yeah.
There were a lot of these little success stories around the country. That's a perfect example of just the sheer size of America made it a little more difficult, I think, for bands to break that otherwise would have if they were in the UK.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. And if you could hold that Gypsy album cover up one more time.
Yeah, I love this thing.
Tell me that isn't a prog album cover. I mean,
yeah, it's kind of folk and it's kind of pop. But it's prog, man. There's long songs on here. It's a double album. I mean, come on, it's great. It's just a fantastic thing. Look at these guys, man. Just such a cool band. They could have really been something if they would have had the right people behind them. But, you know, you see a lot of these bands, these early American bands, and there are, you know, if you go on Prog Archives and just click US bands, there are over 1,000 entries.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy, right?
It's just insane how many insanely good bands there were that we've never heard about. And luckily there have been some people that after the fact have gone back and, you know, reissued stuff and archived stuff. And we are really indebted to those people, but talk about those with a couple other albums, you know.
So
but we did have some other artists that were super progressive, you know, like Todd Rundgren. You know, you tell me this isn't a prog album?
Oh, for sure. I mean, Utopia, Todd Rundgren's Utopia and Raw are
That's right.
Because, you know, Mr. Rundgren, who was basically doing pop music prior to these two albums, I think he got the bug. He started listening to some of the Brits, and he was like, oh, I think I can do that as well. Because, I mean, this is full of like these big, long tracks with all sorts of really cool early synthesizer sounds and guitar solos and things like that. The same thing with Ra. I mean, that's
Awesome.
That's total US prog right there.
Oh, yeah.
So
And,
we're looking
and
at
what's,
70.
I think what's interesting about that is, especially that first Utopia album, I hear a whole lot of Mahu Vishnu Orchestra in that thing as well. So Todd was listening to a lot of Yes and a lot of Mahu Vishnu Orchestra, but it came out very Americanized. I don't hear it being him trying to ape anybody. It's just Todd doing Todd. But there were a lot of the lesser known bands that were out there that were definitely indebted to the UK bands. Who wasn't indebted to the UK bands? I mean, let's be honest. When Yes and ELP conquered America, it was going to inspire a bunch of bands. But by that time, it was like 1973, 1974. So it takes a while for things to get rolling, for, you know, young men to get excited and start a band and practice and write songs. So now we're a little late to the game.
A little bit. Yeah. But we're right. I think where we are right now, which kind of, if we're going chronologically here, we're right about 1973. So we've got a couple bands that we're going to start talking about right now. One of whom, I want Tim to jump in here, kind of came out of another band, a San Francisco band called Santana, and that's Journey. So, you know, most people think Journey, oh, you know, the big arena rock band. Yes, absolutely. But their first three albums, as Tim's going to talk a little bit about, I would argue really belong in this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Really, really unsung albums. And surprisingly, given the number of albums they've sold, I don't think any of those three Journey albums are certified, which is crazy. You'd think that over the years, given how popular they became, that they have at least gone gold, but they haven't. Real quick, though, before I jump into Journey, when you were talking about Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Chicago, up here in Canada, we kind of had our own version of that. And I don't know if they were popular in the States, but there was a band called Lighthouse that was very, very similar. I think their big song was called One Fine Morning, but they were like a big 9-piece band with a horn section. And I think they used to get confused. People would think it was Blood, Sweat, and Tears or early Chicago. So, you know, I mean, of course, Canada was very much mirroring, you know, what was going on in the US. There's another band that would come out of Canada later, 3-piece band that, you know, we might get into a little bit. Maybe you've heard of them. But yeah, the Journey albums, man, I'm always glad to talk about these albums because I discovered these much later. I mean, Journey's obviously a band that growing up in the 80s were one of the first, you know, sort of rock bands that I got into. And obviously I got into them with the Steve Perry era stuff. You know, you just couldn't escape it, no pun intended. But it was 89 before I realized, pre-internet, the information wasn't always at your fingertips. But I found an old reference book in my local library that was like a music encyclopedia, and I realized that Journey had 3 albums before Infinity. I didn't know that. I always thought Infinity was their debut. So I happened to find them little by little. And since we are in the 70s, I thought it apropos if I show them in this form. So this is the first Journey album. Now, does this look like a commercial rock album to anybody out there? You know, so this is, like Pete said, they formed sort of out of the ashes of the original Santana. Greg Raleigh, keyboards, vocals, was with them from the get-go, and then this young hotshot guitarist Neil Schon joined on their 3rd album. They eventually formed their own band. And you might notice there's 5 people on this album cover. And this is the only one that featured a guy who actually just passed away not too long ago, George Tickner, who was another guitar player and a very important writer in the band. And he wrote these sort of complicated guitar parts, and it really shaped the sound. Like there's absolutely nothing commercial on this album. I mean, there are long tracks, a lot of instrumental stuff, and just amazing interplay. Like Neil Schon at 21, just ripping it up on the guitar. Ainsley Dunbar on the drums, amazing. Like anyone
Zappa connection, right? I mean, the Ainsley Dunbar, right? He's been in so many bands.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, anyone who has any doubts of the progness of these early Journey, I would direct them straight to the song Cahotek, which is one of my favorite instrumentals ever. and it's on the first Journey album, and it's got fast parts, it's got heavy parts, it's got mellow parts. But I mean, just to remember how all these go, that takes some arrangement know-how. So, so that album comes up. Like I said, none of these albums did very well. They followed it up in 76. Now they're a 4-piece look into the future. But by the way, I always liked Greg Raleigh's vocals. I always thought he had a really cool
100%.
vocal style. And
I agree.
And for Columbia to say, oh, you guys need a lead singer, it's like, you guys put out Black Magic Woman. That was a top 5 single. Greg Raleigh can sing hit singles. But anyway, I digress. This album may be leaning a little bit more towards songcraft, the shorter songs like on a Saturday night, but they do a really here's another thing a lot of these prog bands from Yes on down had in common. They all love the Beatles.
Yeah.
So, Yes covered the Beatles. So here's Journey covering It's All Too Much. They totally revamped the song and they turned it into prog. I mean, they totally make it prog. And then finally in 77, they put this out next, which, I mean, look at, if that's not a picture of a prog band, I don't know what is. The mustaches and but yeah, another fantastic instrumental on here, Nickel and Dime. And you can't tell me that the guys in Rush didn't hear Nickel and Dime. When I hear Nickel and Dime, I hear bits of what would become Tom Sawyer, and the whole reason it's called Nickel and Dime is because the song is in 5 and it's in 10, like these complicated time signatures. And I just, even if somebody thinks that they never hear Don't Stop Believing or Open Arms Again, and I kind of don't blame you for that, but if you're dismissing Journey as a pop rock band, but you like prog, you'd be pleasantly surprised by checking out any of these first 3 Journey albums, or if you want to get the In the Beginning compilation. And Journey really, even past that, even once they had Steve Perry, they had elements of their songs that weren't your standard 4/4 rock songs. You listen to something like Winds of March on Infinity. I mean, that's got some pretty tricky passages. And then the little known Dream After Dream, the soundtrack they did for that Japanese film. To me, that's like if Journey did another album in their early days, but with Steve Perry, that's the closest to it. But the song Destiny, the first song on that album, that is an epic. So they totally had prog chops, and I'm sure they were influenced by, I mean, even you could argue some of the Santana stuff had.
Oh, no doubt. The first 3 Santana albums definitely sound like prog to me, going back even further. So
yeah, no one ever thinks of Journey as a prog band, but they had a prog. I think they had a full-on prog period.
Yeah, they did. And it's interesting that you said none of those first 3 albums have been certified, which you'd almost understand if the band had changed their name or if they were on a different label. I mean, they were on the same label the whole time, and they still, they best priced all 3 of them for years and years and years. You could get them for like $3.99 and they still couldn't go gold.
That's how I found the cassettes in the late 80s. And I'd never seen them before, so I just kept looking on the sides of them. Oh, that says Journey, and it's not a title I recognize. So, yeah, Dream After Dream was the one that threw me. I found that in like 1990. I'd never even heard of it.
Yeah.
And I go, what the heck is this? Like, I didn't know they had.
Very quietly released that,
Yeah.
And it wasn't until like they got the box set that I realized what the story with that was, because I thought I had all their albums, and then I saw this. It's like, oh, is this the same Journey? It's on Columbia. Oh, this is weird. Yeah,
very odd.
So kind of along those same lines, let's kind of keep that theme going. So let's talk about Styx a little bit here. So Styx is a band who, again, I think really early on, like Journey, had elements of prog and hard rock and boogie and pop all mixed into their music. So you had prog flavors, and we've got the wooden nickel stuff. I see you've got some stuff behind you there.
Oh yeah, the wooden nickel stuff is fun.
Yeah, the wooden nickel stuff is fun. It's a little less polished, right? Yeah. Than what would come after. I actually really like Man of Miracles as well.
And I really love The Serpent is Rising.
Yeah, they're both really good, right?
I love it, man.
But I think for me, Styx's emergence as a band that really knew how to play progressive rock, and really started with Equinox, which has some terrific, I mean, Sweet Madam Blue and Lorelei, you got some heavy rock on there.
Born for Adventure.
Born for Adventure is killer. Crystal Ball, Tommy Shaw comes into the band, and I think here it really starts to come together. I mean, Ballerina is total prog. Mademoiselle is just so cool. This Old Man. I mean, Dennis DeYoung told me himself that he was into all those prog bands from the early 70s. So it's not surprising.
Didn't he tell you that he thought of Styx as prog light? And it came out of his own mouth. So, I mean, he knows what they were. He knows they weren't going to be the most complex band in the world, but yeah, I argue that Equinox is a prog album.
Yeah.
Crystal Ball is a prog album.
Yep.
And the next two
is certainly a prog album.
Yeah, absolutely.
This to me is their best prog album. And even though Fooling Yourself and the title track and Come Sail Away were played on the radio, you can't listen to Castle Walls and Man in a Wilderness and not tell me that's not prog.
That is prog.
It totally is.
That is prog rock.
And there's plenty of it on this one too, even though this one's a little harder rocking. I still think Pieces of Eight has elements as well.
Yeah, it's a prog album. And then you could say, okay, maybe there's a little bit of prog on Paradise Theater and Precious Little on some of the others, but Cornerstone had a few moments. Even Kilroy had some moments that were proggy. But I'll argue that their last two
100%
are as prog as it gets, man.
100%.
I love Dennis DeYoung, but they're just fine without him. These two albums are incredible, man.
And I think that, Scott, I really think that the band consciously said, well, they went and looked back at some of their biggest albums of the 70s, and they say, why we can still do that sort of thing, because I think those two albums are throwbacks to like Crystal Ball and Grand Illusion. 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Throw in kind of like these little Queenisms here and there mixed with what they normally do. Really, really good stuff. So
brilliant.
So logically, that brings us to Kansas.
It does.
Which is the reason why we're doing this episode.
It has to. The greatest of all American prog bands.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Guys, what do you think of this statement? I would, I've read plenty of interviews with guys from this band over the years, and Kerry Livgren and many of the other ones, they came right out and said, we love bands like King Crimson and Yes and Gentle Giant. They loved all that stuff. That's where they took their inspiration. I would argue none of these albums sound like any of those bands. It takes a blueprint of what prog is supposed to be all about, but it's really American sounding. And I have a feeling a lot of British and UK fans, that's the issue that they have with Kansas, is they don't want to accept it as prog because it sounds too American. But why can't it sound American? Just like the Italian bands like PFM and Bonko and all, they sound Italian, right? They have elements that we love about the style of music.
And they're rewarded and honored for it and cherished for it because they're leaning into their Italianness. Yeah. And that's what I love about Italian prog. But yeah, you're right. I think we get penalized as Americans for leaning into our Americana, as you will. And Kansas did it beautifully. I've never thought of, well, that passage sounds like, something Tony Banks was doing on Foxtrot, or boy, that guitar line sounds a whole lot like something Fripp did on Star Listed By. I'm not going there with Kansas. They're their own thing. They're so unique. And they're super progressive. Their first 6 albums are, to me, 6 of the best prog rock albums I've ever heard in my life. I will go to bat for all 6. I'm glad you got Monolith front and center. A lot of people stop at Point of No Return, and I understand that's a mistake because Monolith is every bit as good as the other in that first 6. Just so good.
Tim, do you think if we take Dust in the Wind and Carry On Wayward Son out of the equation, those were never massive hits, do you think people would look at this catalog a little bit differently who are resistant to it because they were so popular?
Probably.
Well, my thoughts about Carry On Wayward Son is try and play it. That's a complicated song.
I agree with you. Yeah.
And Dust in the Wind, a lot of people say, it's just an acoustic song. You try to play it correctly. And how many violin players do you know? It takes some chops to do that. And, even back to Styx, Come Sail Away, that is not your typical pop song.
No.
It stops right down. It's got spacey passages. It's like mini prog. But Kansas, I've championed Kansas, for years and years and years. And to me, it's not about the moments, and I'll say this a lot, I was thinking about this, but it's not about the moments in their catalog that aren't very proggy. It's not about the moments where they go into a little like boogie woogie or something like that. It's not about that. It's about what they do when they do go prog. Like, for example, okay, so to start with the first one, 1974. I mean, it's very American, right? It's an American flag on it.
We got all the formats covered here, folks.
Yeah, just need a cassette. Anybody got a reel to reel out there? But yeah, so they cover J.J. Cale, Bringing It Back. So same guy that brought us Call Me the Breeze that Lynyrd Skynyrd covered. So okay, maybe Lynyrd Skynyrd could cover Bringing It Back, but could they cover Journey from Maribyrnong? Could they cover Bellix's, or however you say that? Could they cover Death of Mother Nature Suite? I mean, I just love this band so much, and lyrically, it's totally prog. The Pilgrimage. I mean, how much more prog a title do you need for that? Or how do you even say aperçu? How do you say that?
Aperçu. I always call it aperçu.
I think it's supposed to be like
Bellix's. I don't even know what those words mean, man.
Yeah. That's
only Carrie Lindgren knows.
Yeah.
That says it all right there. You're making up languages, right?
So awesome.
Yeah. Total prog, and very American. I think the fiddle makes it, or fiddle, violin makes it completely American, makes it a little bit different. But how unprog is that? Why is it that Jethro Tull can have flute front and center, right, but Kansas can't have violin front and center as that sort of non-standard rock instrumentation?
Well, even beyond just having those two hits, Pete, I think what some people penalized Kansas for was on the first album, you had that J.J. Cale. On the second album, you had, the one rock song. On Mask, you had a couple of rock songs. It Takes a Woman's Love and 2 Cents Worth or whatever. So those first three albums all had like a distinctly non-prog track or two. Yeah. You listen to Left Overture, it's all prog from start to finish. Yeah. So their first album is my favorite album, but if I'm trying to convince somebody of Kansas's progness, I think I point to Left Overture.
Well, I mean, like, as far as doing covers, look at the first two Yes albums. Yeah, they covered the Beatles. They covered Buffalo Springfield. Yeah, they did covers. There was no, it wasn't against the law to do covers, and Kansas did not do a lot of cover songs. No. You get the song for America, the title song, Lamplight Symphony. If you listen to Lamplight Symphony and then you listen to Turn of the Century by Yes, it's practically the same subject. So they're dealing in that lyrical In Commudro, Hymn to the Atman. What kind of pop song is that? What kind of boogie woogie song is that? Again, I mean, you get Down the Road, you got Lonely Street. Right. So it's not about what they do in those moments, it's what they do in the prog moments. And to me, it all just spells versatility. Mask. So yeah, it takes a woman's love to make a man. Obviously, They had a gun to the head. You guys need a hit. But it's catchy. But then you've got Mysteries and Mayhem, Child of Innocence. Just like you had The Pilgrimage sounding like a prog title, The Pinnacle. Yeah. Icarus, Born on Wings of Steel.
It doesn't get any more prog sounding than that.
No. And even on Left Overture, Miracles Out of Nowhere. That's got an odd time signature to it. It changes up. Questions of My Childhood is really tricky. Magnum opus, for crying out loud. Yeah. It's one of the things I always found weird about Carrie and Wayward Son is that, there's no violin in it. Right. Carrie didn't write any violin parts. So I always kind of felt bad for Robbie Steinhardt because he gets to sing some background vocals, but that's about it. But again, you say it's pop because you've heard it so much. It's pop as in popular. It's still a really complex song to. Oh yeah, I think it reached number 11 in 1977. You look at the charts in 1977. It's full of disco. It's full of singer-songwriters, and then right in the middle of it, you get Carry On Wayward Son. I mean, it had rock. It had hard rock elements to it, but it had a lot of prog. It was really, it's an amazing song, and to me, it's one of those. To me, it's one of those bulletproof songs that it doesn't matter how many times I hear it. I'm still hearing Kansas on the radio. So I'm good. I'm in. I'm good with it. So
and I never thought that radio play should be something that gives you demerits, right? Because last I remember, Lucky Man was played on the radio quite a bit. That's a pop song with a crazy Emerson Moog solo at the end, right?
Roundabout hit number 14.
I See No Good People is a pop song.
Yeah.
How Prog is owner of a Lonely Heart. I know that's later, but it's still a band that's no one would ever deny their progness.
Yep. I mean, in Italy, Banco and PFM and Le Orme, all of them were chasing hits later on, but we don't question whether they were prog bands, in their earlier incarnations. So that's a silly premise to hold it against them.
Yeah.
Even though, it seems to be the big holdup people have is they had a hit song. I don't know why it applies to Kansas and no one else.
And look at this cover art. I mean, is that not some of the coolest? I mean, I just love it, And Point of No Return, they've got 10 songs in the album for the first time, but they still got epics. They've still got Closet Chronicles and Hopelessly Human, and
Yeah, and some of those songs track together, like the Spider and Portrait He Knew kind of linked together. So yeah, there's 10 tracks, but it does kind of sound like they're epic tracks, in there. And it's the same artist that did Point of No Return that did Song for America. Yeah. What a great, such great artwork on those records.
And it's one of my favorite logos too.
Logo's cool too.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, that was important.
Nobody ever talks about this album. I love this album. I love the fact that the music industry was such back then that they could, I know they were coming off 2 big multi-platinum albums and a platinum live album, but they delivered a really moody, dark, uncommercial album. And CBS Records said, okay.
Yeah.
I love the fact they were able to do that. But on the other side, How My Soul Cries Out for You, that is like mixed, it's got a bar fight in the middle of it. Doesn't make any sense. Angels Have Fallen, that's an epic, epic song. I just, this is a prog band.
Even love the disco song, man. People of the South Wind.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the best disco prog song. It's just awesome. I love Monolith. I go to bat for Monolith whenever I can.
Too.
The band was getting tired. Constant, nonstop recording, touring. The cycle was getting on them, and the drugs and everything was starting to take their toll on certain members of the band. And the writing was on the wall that it probably wasn't going to last too much longer. But man, Monolith is such a great last hurrah.
And they still delivered. They never folded it in. It's funny. You listen to a song like People of the South Wind. If you were just getting into, like I did, I didn't get into this band until like 92, but listening back, People of the South Wind sounds 1979 to me. It's not it's not disco per se, but you can hear those elements. It's just really funny because Bad Company did it with Rock and Roll Fantasy, but and then like one of my favorites, this is a dark horse album right here.
I like Audio Visions a lot too. Yeah,
this is the first one that I ever heard. As a matter of fact, the first time I heard it was in this very form right here. I found this in a garbage bag full of 8 tracks, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like, so Relentless, what a great opener that is. Loner, that's a really fast one. But as far as the prog, returning. Yeah, No One Together, that's a prog.
Oh, No One Together. Yeah. That's
prog. Curtain of Iron, that's an epic.
Oh, that's a good track too.
Yeah. There's some commercial moments, Hold On, Anything for You, but it's what they're doing in between. And even those, more commercial moments, they're brilliantly played, they're brilliantly produced. So then you get Steve Walsh leaving, and then you get the album I named my channel after, Vinyl Confessions, which the only complaint I have, why did they stop using the coolest logo? Why did they go for this? Why did they go for the children's book look?
Yeah,
I've never understood that. But yeah. So Play the Game Tonight. Yeah, okay. It's a little bit, it's a little bit commercial. I think that that was an outside songwriter type of thing where they kind of adapted it to Kansas. But it's play it. Try and play it. Try and learn it. I've never seen a bar band come out with Play the Game Tonight. But Windows. Oh man. I know that was an older song. I think that's was about 5 years old at this point, but try and play that on the drums. That's the time signatures go all over the place, and that Crossfire goes through a lot of ups and downs. And this was not, it's a little bit more commercial, it was a little bit more accessible, but there are still moments on here where they were full on prog. Now, probably, I'm going to say maybe their least prog album was Drastic Measures.
I can't go to bat for that one, man. But I fell off the train right there.
but this is what I like as somebody that grew up with 80s, sort of more commercial sounding bands. When I got into Kansas, I actually the one of the first things I got was this on CD, the best of.
Yep.
I love this cover too, where it incorporates, elements of, it's like Exit Stage Left. It's got elements of the previous. I love looking for the stuff like that. But I remember the third song on there is Fight Fire with Fire. And I remember thinking, I had no idea Kansas did songs like this that were just straightforward rock songs. And I loved it. But, mainstream has some parts in it that are kind of, off the beaten track. Certainly Incident on a Bridge, End of the Age. It's very 1983 sounding in its production, but I still think there are prog-ish moments on here. And then they get to what I have called my favorite Kansas album, which is Power, 1986. So they got Steve Morrison. This is where I first heard Kansas. I saw the video for All I Wanted. And about 6 years later, when I got into the band, I'm like, yeah, I still like that song. But then I got the album, listened like Silhouettes in Disguise, We're Not Alone Anymore, Musicado. There's still prog stuff on here. I mean, Steve Morse came from the Dixie Dregs, for crying out loud. So, and yes, commercial, very, very commercial. And I still maintain to this day, this album should have done for Kansas what 90125 did for Yes. Like, this should have been a huge album. There were potential, they could have gone 3-4 singles deep on this, and they would have been a popular band all over again.
Yeah, it's a good record, but there's no violin, and that's gonna that Kansas name doesn't have the same. It's not clicking in people's brains the same way. Power was a good record, man. Steve
I like
Morse,
it quite a bit. Yeah.
Steve Walsh.
So now I'm done with 8 tracks. I went all the way to 86. So now In the Spirit of Things comes out. They got Bob Ezrin producing. Now I love all the Kansas albums, to be quite honest. This is probably my least favorite, but I still like some of the stuff on it. There were an awful lot of outside writers. I know MCA was just pushing. I don't know what they were pushing for, because, but they've got stuff on here like House on Fire, The Preacher, like there's Bells of St. James. I saw the one time I saw Kansas in concert in 94, they did Bells of St. James, and it was amazing.
Yeah, I saw that. Awesome.
But yeah, this still has prog elements to it. And obviously, they went into the wilderness years. But I got to tell you, one of my favorite albums of the 90s was this.
Oh, Freaks of Nature kicks ass.
That's a great record, man.
So this was the first album to come out after I'd become a fan. So this is the first one I was really looking forward to. And I listened to this album all the time.
Yeah.
This has got some prog. So Black Fathom 4, that's a heavy, heavy song, and it's proggy.
Yeah.
This title song is, Cold Gray Morning is a Kerry Livgren song. I think they do it really, really well on here. I Can Fly, the opener. David Ragsdale on violin now, so they've got more of that traditional sound, but updated. It's some of the stuff is like, I love the production on here. It was like a do-it-yourself. I think they had Jeff Glicksman produce it, but they did it on a kind of, probably not on a big budget because it was on a smaller label, but they still managed to come out with a good song.
One thing about that album, you could start to hear the cracks in Steve Walsh's vocals starting.
I think you can hear it on In the Spirit of Things, and if you've got the King Biscuit Live from Philadelphia on the In the Spirit of Things tour, you can hear his voice. He was not too good to himself, I don't think.
No.
But he still
didn't treat himself well at all.
Cocaine's not the hell of a drug everybody says it is, right?
Yeah, did not help the vocal cords much.
No, and that Live at the Whiskey.
Yeah.
Boy, he sounds pretty shaky on some of those songs, but I love his voice. I mean, that's another thing. He never gets talked about in the great classic rock vocalists, and I think he should.
Yeah,
he had so much soul in his voice, and in his prime, he could sing high and make it sound easy, like it was not straining him whatsoever. You watch those old, like the Don Kirshner rock concert performances, he's pounding away at the keyboards, and he is just wailing, or he's playing the bongos. He amazing vocalist and a good frontman too. And they still got a good vocal performance out of him on this.
Not bad.
Somewhere elsewhere. I really like this album.
Not bad
I don't
at
know
all.
why they changed the cover on the vinyl issue, but I really like the song. I was a big fan of this album. Icarus 2 became they would start to do that, and then they followed up with the original Icarus, but Distant Vision, Byzantium, and by now they've got a really good secondary vocalist with Billy Greer.
Yeah.
Look at the time. That's a good vocal from him.
Well, if anybody
but
hadn't heard, Billy's wife just passed away unexpectedly the other day.
I hadn't heard.
oh,
Yeah,
Kathy.
yeah,
Oh, that's too. I did not know that. That's
yeah. Just like literally a day or two ago, I heard.
wow. That's rough.
So our thoughts go out.
But then, but they're two comeback albums.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know, these are great. Like these are fantastic prog albums.
Oh, the Prelude.
That takes us back to the two most recent Styx albums, right?
Yeah,
So here you
exactly.
have Styx and Kansas.
Nice comebacks, both
knocking it out of the park. Yep.
Like Ronnie Platt's, he's just killing it. You know, he doesn't sound like Steve Walsh necessarily, but he's close enough. He's got the range. Yeah,
I love Ronnie Platt's voice.
I gave these albums glowing reviews when they first came out, and I listen to them all the time, and I love the live albums they put out too. These guys are totally prog. Yes, they had moments, especially in the '80s, where they were leaning towards more commercial sounds, but I don't think they went full on. I don't think there was anything remotely sellout about it, because maybe the most straightforward song they ever had was Fight Fire with Fire, but that was kind of written in house. I mean, John Elefant and his brother wrote that. John was in the band. Did it sound like Kansas? No. But to me, when I hear something like that in a case like this, I don't think selling out and altering their sound for radio play. I think, wow, these guys are versatile. So, and if you've ever seen that, the home video they put out from the Vinyl Confessions tour, from I think it was from Omaha. Elefant sounded great singing all that old stuff. I mean, they were still doing No One Together and Sparks of the Tempest, and they were still prog. It's just, I think a lot of these bands really struggled in the '80s to get a foothold. And like I said, I don't know if it was MCA or not, but I still think Power should have been a huge album for them. It was deserving of it. It had what it took, but it still got prog moments on it. If you haven't noticed, I love this band.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, Tim, to your point, and Scott can probably back me up here, many of the '70s bands really struggled moving into the new decade. Yeah, and so many of them, and we could sit here and name all of them, right? Not only from here, but the international bands as well. When we moved into the '80s, they tried to alter their sound to fit into this new decade, and most of them failed miserably.
Yeah. Well,
some of them didn't even make it. I mean, look at Gentle Giant, right? They tried and they were like, you know what, this isn't for us, we're done. But so many others, I mean, look at some of the Italian bands. They put out these putrid albums going into the '80s that
really
didn't sound like them anymore. Most of these Kansas albums in the '80s, for the most part, still had the essence of Kansas. Yeah, they were a little more commercial, but they were still proggy moments. They still sounded like Kansas. Other bands didn't have that luxury and they couldn't do it.
I think Kansas were more successful than most. As far as the awkwardness of transitioning in the '80s, I think you see that in their videos. If you watch, like the video for Play the Game Tonight or Windows, or, I mean, I kind of like them for their early '80s, we have no idea what we're doing directing these videos, but they didn't have that look, right? They weren't able to transition. I think by the time that Power came out, they I don't know if they got a stylist or something that said, got them to dress a little bit differently. But I mean, this is a band where, Rich Williams wearing overalls, right? I mean, that might have been another reason why people don't just, kind of were dismissive of them. They get this big guy with an eye patch wearing overalls. It's like, is that a prog band? But
they needed the long capes and things, right? Like, they didn't look enough like Rick Wakeman or Geddy and Alex, right? They needed the little
all of those prog bands, though, all of the prog bands struggled as far as image goes in the '80s.
Yeah, they did.
Very few of them were able to transition into that '80s period. And I mean, Kansas, it's funny to me that they lasted as long as they did before the eventual hiatus. They put 3 albums out in the early '80s, and then they were this strange combination of this commercial band but a prog band. And it was a rough period, but they came out of it. And I think that the albums that they did, I mean, even the original songs on the Always Never the Same were still pretty good, and they still had the prog elements. And I just don't think they did a bad album, and I don't think they ever did an album that was completely devoid of prog. As a matter of fact, most of them have a fair bit of prog. I think Drastic Measures and then In the Spirit of Things are probably on the prog scale the least amount per square inch, but there's still prog moments on both of those. So they just they're totally a prog band, and they would be the first to admit that they were influenced by the British prog bands for sure. There's only one part in Kansas's career where I can hear a direct that might have been an unintentional borrow. When I listen to the verses of Song for America, and then I listen to Sweet Dreams by Yes, very, very similar. But that's it. There's nowhere else where I go, oh, well, they totally ripped that off from, except for maybe Carry On Wayward Son, borrowing a little bit from a song from this album called I'm Gonna Leave You. Because anybody that's ever heard that song knows that it comes on with a da 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 da, very similar.
Yeah, I never made that connection before.
I'm gonna have to go listen to it now.
Same year, and my understanding is that they toured together at that time. I'm not saying it was intentional, but I got to tell you,
things happen.
I've seen some pretty frivolous copyright lawsuits. I hope I don't see one.
I hope you didn't start something there.
Because Neil Sean loves to sue. Neil Sean loves to sue people. So,
you know what's weird, Tim, is that both Kansas and Styx, it kind of took them a while to get any kind of commercial success, any kind of real footing in the American market. They were from America, you know.
Yeah.
Styx, those Wooden Nickel albums didn't do anything. They had a hit song on their second album that didn't become a national hit for like 2 or 3 years. They didn't get signed till 75. And then you got Kansas. Their first 3 albums didn't do anything commercially at all. So Left Overture was 76. And you had, not a whole lot going on, but there were a few exceptions. There were a few bands that were like poking up, Fire Ballet from your neck of the woods, Pete.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
really
a fantastic record this is, man. Ian McDonald produced this thing. He plays flute on 2 songs. He plays sax on 2 songs. There's a sidelong suite based on a Mazursky piece. There's Debussy in there. This record's awesome, man.
I've never even heard of it, of Fire Ballet.
Yeah,
but this is I think overall, like, when you talk about bands from the 70s, not necessarily just prog bands, but man, most of my favorite bands that I listen to all the time wouldn't have had a career in this day and age, because very, very few of those bands hit big on their very first album. I count on one hand: Boston, Foreigner, Van Halen. Very few of them. Most of them were 3rd, 4th. I mean, look at REO Speedwagon. I mean, their big album was their 11th album. So and so for Kansas, it was very much like Rush. It was their 4th album was make or break, and I think Styx was about the same. Speaking of, I remember reading an interview with Tommy Shaw where he said that Man in the Wilderness, he wrote that after seeing Kansas in concert.
Wow.
So he freely admitted that, like, yeah, I love those guys. I wanted to write a song like that.
No doubt.
You had prog coming from all kinds of weird places too. And that was part of the problem. Again, I talked about how big the country is, but if you're a prog band from West Virginia, I mean, what are your odds of getting gigs that'll get you noticed, getting press, paying attention? These guys moved to the big city and they did get signed, but this is a band that should have been huge. First album came out in 75. Their first 3 albums did chart, but I think like in the low 100s. But there's another story of a band that came out of the US, very prog. They're actually still together today. They've got like 22 albums out. Fantastic, but they are definitely prog, to this point that there was no prog in the US in the 70s. Yeah, we were a little late to the game, probably, but that's just another example. And then we haven't talked about, you talked about ELO or REO, right? REO. Well, how about the singer on REO's first album?
Yeah. Terry Luttrell,
Terry Luttrell, Starcastle, right? Now,
Epic Records. I mean, they're signed to a major label, for crying out loud, right?
Yeah. I mean, 1976, 1977. Roy Thomas Baker produced the 2nd and the 3rd album. These guys were touring left and right. They played a lot of dates, opening for a lot of people. But the problem was maybe it was just a little bit too late in the game for bands like Starcastle, whom I love. They're a lot more than just a Yes clone. But probably my favorite prog band from any country that no one talks about, it's got to be Happy the Man, dude.
Oh,
Come
yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Their first 2 albums are so good.
Arista Records, again, another major label band.
Signed to Arista, yeah. Apparently the A&R guy dragged Clive Davis to a Happy the Man show, and he was just completely bamboozled and confused. I can just imagine what he was thinking. He looks to his partner and says, I don't get it, but sign him anyway. So signed him, and wow, those first 2 albums, just incredible.
But you know, Scott, the problem with these 2 albums, there's no musical problem with them. They're too late to the game as far as like the heyday of prog.
Little late.
Mostly instrumental. That's a hard sell for the general public.
Yeah.
But musically, these are amazing, right? I mean, I don't think anybody who's into this style of music would doubt the.
I wonder, you guys, if we were to sit down and talk about, you know, the American prog bands, where they came from. Like, I bet you most of them did come from unlikely places.
Oh,
you know, like
them.
West Virginia, like Topeka, Kansas. Like, you know,
So let's take that
Midwest.
one step further. Absolutely, 100%, Tim. And you mentioned Steve Morse before, and you mentioned the Dixie Dregs. This is a perfect time to talk about the Dregs. So here's a band from the South.
Yeah.
They're on Capricorn Records, which is a label for Southern rock bands. And they come out with this music that's not Southern rock. Is it Southern sounding? Maybe a little bit. Is it prog? Maybe. Is it jazz? Maybe. Is it bluegrass? Maybe. Is it rock? Is it classical? Is it folk? I don't know. But it's definitely progressive, right? And here's another band that just awesome albums. I mean, you know, and again, you got the violin here, you got keyboards and guitars and amazing bass and drums, and Rod Morgenstein, the drummer,
Rod Morgenstein,
later on, right?
Steve, and he brings an element of, not to get too off topic, but Rod Morgenstein brings an element of prog into Winger. I don't care what anybody says. There are complicated arrangements in a lot of those songs.
Yeah,
I love that band too.
He's amazing.
Yeah,
he's such a good drummer, and you can't talk about Dixie Dregs without talking about some of the incredible bass guitar players they've had. Andy West, and the other guy, Dave LaRue, he can play a little bit. What? Oh my goodness, Dixie Dregs. Yeah, the musicianship completely off the charts. Just love that band so much. Are they prog? Well, you know, a band that's so undefinable is kind of part of the definition of prog to me. If you have a hard time pinning it down, there's a good chance the prog tag might apply.
And a good rule of thumb is if Dream Theater covers you, you're prog.
You're
probably prog-ish at least.
Yeah.
What else we got? How about Ethos, right? Another major label signing, Capitol Records.
Yeah.
Arger and Open Up in 1977, right?
Yeah.
Very cool band. If you like, you know, and some of the more lesser known ones very much mimic the bands from the UK. Easter Island's another one.
Oh yeah.
You know,
fantastic band.
Yeah.
What, out of Louisville, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got Lift, Caverns of Your Brain from '77, another really cool band.
Awesome
I mean, for the
band.
folks who like Kansas and Styx and those sort of bands, Surprise is another band. Assault on Maryland.
Out of St. Louis,
Missouri. Yeah, a lot of upper Midwest bands, right?
Yeah.
Here. I mean, Scott, we have to talk about them because to me, they're probably one of the best of all the unknown bands, and that's Cathedral.
Yes.
And again, not to be confused.
I got the vinyl reissue, so we're looking at both covers there.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
these
so
guys
not the UK
no,
metal. Yeah.
not the metal.
I was just going to say that, Tim. Yep, not the UK band. And these guys were from New York. I think they're a Long Island band.
Long Island.
If you like early Genesis, King Crimson, and Yes, and maybe a little Gentle Giant, loads of Mellotron, you've come to the right place.
Incredible.
And
then you had
Texas.
Hands out of Texas. Yep.
Yep.
Who
Who else have we missed, Scott?
These guys from Cleveland, the Atlantis Philharmonic, very Yes and ELP indebted band. The regionalism that we were talking about really hindered any semblance of a scene. There was no synergy. There were no venues for these guys to play at, no music press to talk about them. So much talent, so much greatness. But we got to talk about probably my favorite band from the American scene. Had these guys done 6 straight genius albums like Kansas, I'd probably like them as much as Kansas. I don't have the vinyl. I'm a poor guy, but it's Mirthrander, man.
Yeah, it's a great album.
For you, the old woman. What an incredible band. These guys met up at Berkeley. So you kind of get the idea that maybe they're good at their instruments a little bit. Wow, just incredible. I love that band so much. And nobody talks about them. But if you want to make an argument that American prog was every bit as good as UK prog, we've just given you a little bit of evidence
just a little bit.
Back that statement up.
Yep. I mean, throw Yes the Earth in there, throw Babylon in there. Is there any that we failed to? I think we covered most of them.
Well, there's a whole bunch of them.
The Muffins, Tent Water. I mean, there's tons of these obscure bands that, like Scott mentioned, just kind of popped up in all these little weird pockets.
Tent Water from Chicago.
Yep.
Awesome band. Babylon from St. Petersburg, Florida.
Yeah.
Like you said, The Load from Columbus, Ohio, just popping up left and right. There were all these bands. Arabesque out of Pittsburgh, Free out of Northern Kentucky. It's just incredible. A Netherworld out of San Jose. So it was all over the place. It wasn't just like one part of the country.
No.
And if it had been, perhaps it would have been a different story.
That's the thing. I mean, very few of these that we're talking about here were from major markets. I think I mentioned the Muffets before, and they were from the DC area. That's probably as major as you're going to get, because most of these bands were from small areas, and there was no scene anywhere. Yeah. It's not like there was a Long Island scene or a New York scene or a DC scene or an LA scene for this style of music. There wasn't at all. It wasn't all. It's not like over in the UK we had the Canterbury scene, right? Or you had the Birmingham scene, right? None of that was happening here.
A lot of Midwest, though, like a lot of Midwest, a lot of Southern. But not Southern rock sounding at all. Like you could almost take a map of the U.S. and go one here, one here, one here. Now I have to ask, from where my corner of the woods in Eastern Canada, were there any from Maine? Because I'm right on the border of Maine.
I'm sure there were. And what we saw a lot of times is, like I mentioned, Arabesque from Pittsburgh. They released absolutely nothing in the 70s, recorded a bunch between 72 and 77, and then years and years later, like in 2002, I think, decided to gather it up and release it. I wonder how many bands there are out there that never ended up releasing it, have these lost genius. They're out there, man. It's out there. But because there was no commercial viability for that kind of music, who knows, it's probably lost in the sands of time forever. And that's really sad. But, we have had reissue campaigns like Symphonic and Shroom Productions have gone back, thankfully, and re-released a lot of this stuff so that we can enjoy it. Because, I can't afford any of this original stuff, man. We need it to be.
And to your point, I think if you're folks here who are watching and you have like these cool reissues that came out 20, 30 years ago on Shroom, on Symphonic, on Laser's Edge, hold on to those.
Yeah.
They're very rare, and they're probably going to be worth a lot of money. And before we go, I think it makes sense, since we're talking North America, we do need to mention bands like Rush and Max Webster, right? Who I think also are part of this conversation. As part of the Americas that are
part of the same geographic ideal and the same timeline also, pretty much. If you look at being maybe slightly late in the game, Rush's first album came out the same year Kansas's first album. So there are a lot of parallels.
Yeah, for sure.
And Saga.
Yeah, Saga as well. That's right. Yep. The latter part of the decade. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the point we're trying to make here today, and hopefully that some of you agree, and if you don't, that's fine, is that progressive rock is not only a UK and European thing. There's certainly plenty of great bands who have come out here in the US and North America, and arguably some bands that predate anything that's labeled as prog from anywhere was happening here in the States, right? If you look back at the psychedelic scene and whatnot. So, So what's the first ever prog album? Who cares? That's up for debate. Everybody's got a different opinion on it. But I would urge anybody who's maybe not from the US or North America. There's a lot of great prog from here. And we only just really talk about the 70s and a little bit of the 80s.
Yeah.
You start talking more recent times, and there's lots of good stuff here. Then you're talking Spock's Beard and all sorts of other stuff, Glass Hammer and Discipline. And yeah. So, I mean, there's
lots of good stuff. I mean, yeah, there's been tons of great American music throughout the history of prog. We said right at the onset that Americans are definitely part of the creation story of prog. And so we're not going to be pushed around, man. We're demanding a little bit of respect today.
That's right. And I do want to mention one last time, because I don't sleep on those two most recent Kansas albums and the two most recent Styx albums. They are excellent.
Amazing.
Check those out. I would argue that there's more prog in any of those 4 albums than anything Yes has done in quite a long time. So
agreed.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah,
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
There you go. So
Thanks,
let's hear a little bit from these two gentlemen. So Tim, tell us a little bit about your channel, and you got a book you want to talk about it, don't you?
Yeah. Thanks, Pete. Yeah, my channel's Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I started it in 2014, and it started as a way to show off my vinyl, but I made it to other formats, as you've seen. And the whole reason it's called Vinyl Confessions, I'm just a huge Kansas fan, and I've flown the flag for them. I've always wondered, like I said, I got into them in '92 with a lot of other 70s bands like Zeppelin and Purple. And to me, they're every bit as good, if not more. To me, they're like the kings of the second tier as far as classic rock goes, but they should be higher than that. And they sold a lot of records. I just think they just deserve more recognition. And yeah, those last 2 albums of theirs are fantastic. And yeah, some of you might be wondering, when I hold up things like these, like, whoa, those are getting on in the 80s and they're on 8-track. Well, yes, that's because Columbia House and RCA Music Service continued to make certain albums on 8-track all the way through 1988, which is a lot of what this book is about, which is called Unspooled, an adventure in 8 tracks. I put this out a couple years ago in a Kickstarter campaign. It is now on Amazon. So wherever you live, wherever your Amazon is, you can order it up. I've got the back cover blurb written by no less than Donna Halper herself, the lady responsible for bringing Rush to the masses. The foreword was generously contributed by no stranger to this channel, the one, the only Martin Popoff. And in between, it goes from 1981 through 1988, and it talks about different music collecting stories. It's not just about 8 tracks, certainly. It's about music, nostalgia. Collectors of everything will find something to like here. My good friend Matthew Phillips from Go North Design did a great job designing the book. It's got some fantastic photos in here. I just want to show it real quick. Like the layout is really good, and it comes out really well on the Amazon version, which is a print on demand. And let's see, let's get some prog in here, because we all, this whole thing's about prog. Well, here you go. Here's the entire Yes discography as it exists on 8-track, which is the first album all the way through 901 through 5. But yeah, it's on Amazon. Look for Unspooled. That should bring it up, but it should bring, type my name in if necessary. You'll see the book. You can flip through it. You can look inside of it. And thanks to everybody that's bought it. And thanks, Pete, for giving me the chance to plug it. I'm very proud of it. I'm glad it's more readily available now. And that grew out of the channel, which just me talking about the music that I love and the collector's aspect of it. And yeah.
Awesome. And for those who missed it, I reviewed the book and showed a lot of the insides. So if you want to go back here into the playlist and the reviews playlist, you can see my review of the book and see a little bit more of what it's about, see if it might be something for you. It is a lot of fun. So go check it out. Give some love to Tim and his channel. And Scott, I'll turn it over to you. You want to talk a little bit about the Prog Corner?
Hey, I don't have anything to sell today, but that's all right.
Sell your channel. Come on.
Man. I wouldn't want to compete against Tim's book. That looks awesome, by the way. But yeah, I've got a little channel called the Prog Corner, where we just talk about prog rock. I post like 3-4 times a week, and we just have a lot of fun. It's nostalgia core. We talk about the oldies, the golden era of the 70s, a whole bunch. But I use that as a hook to get you in so that I can talk about the stuff I really want to talk about, which is modern prog rock. Prog is not dead. It is my mission to support and promote bands that are doing great prog music today. And there's so many of them. So it's just exciting to get up every morning and think about, who am I going to listen to today and who am I going to talk about on the channel? And I get excited talking about prog rock. So I started a YouTube channel 20 months ago. and it's been doing amazing. Thank you so much. And Pete, thank you for having me on. This was a great topic. I love American prog. It's one of the things I'm really passionate about. Kansas Sticks, Darkcastle, Happy the Man, Cathedral, Mirthrender, Yezda, Urfa. These bands get me really fired up. But maybe we should do a follow-up down the road about the modern American prog scene, because there's so many great American prog bands that are out there today. I contend that we've got better prog bands than the Brits today.
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I would agree with you on that. The tables have turned, I think.
Tables have turned, man. Now, I don't think we stand a chance against Norway, but
no, that we don't. Yeah, Norway and Sweden, in my opinion, and when it comes to prog and even hard rock and metal, there's something going on there. I don't know what it is, but it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in closing, I want to echo what Scott just said. It's while we do love talking about nostalgia here on Sea of Tranquility, I think the number one reason why I started this channel years ago and started and took over the webzine back in 2001 was to promote new bands and their new music, and even veteran bands and their new music. So we all love the oldies, but you have to be open-minded towards the new stuff. That's what it's all about, and I firmly believe it. So I'm glad Scott is also the same mindset. So
man, I'd be so bored if that's all we got to talk about was Yes and Genesis and ELP.
We love them, right? But yeah,
they're amazing, but come on.
Yeah. So
it's all been done before and done by people way better than me. So I'm moving on.
There you go. So please
literally just subscribe, Scott. I literally just hit subscribe.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So everybody watching, please go check out the Prog Corner and Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Give a subscribe and a like, and check out some of their content. And visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube, all together, all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button. We also got links down below for our Ko-Fi page, our merch page, and our Cameo page. So thanks for all your support there. For Tim and Scott, I am Pete. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow for ranking the albums and starting off the work week on Monday with the Hudson Valley Squares. Till then, have a good one, everybody. Thanks for watching.